Hi, my name is Jorinde Neves. I'm the Artistic Director of Drawingnow Art Fair, and it's my huge pleasure to introduce you to the talk with Adam Budak, Chief Curator at the National Gallery of Prague, and Jorinde Voigt, who I'm very
Lynn. during work. One hundred different shapes. One of the examples of this technique is 48-part series Love as Love's discourse. Moved from photography, which is normally associated
Because this is too complicated for this. Can you make
this
a easier one? And I did this with the Toyota, I did in Malmö, and this was at this time the most popular car. Your algorithm was also And it was also okay for me to work because I remember very much when I came out of
But I think we shouldn't forget to mention, since we are in France, that a very important or one of the most important masterpieces